And when they came upon the clearing, the men were struck by fear, such that some among them began wailing. For the beast that they had seen fall dead with their own eyes, the beast into which 200 men had dispensed the contents of their rifles, was nowhere to be found. The beast of Gevaudan had survived to vanish right before their very eyes. Unknown author, circa 1785. I've always been into the strange and the mysterious. Stories of unknown beasts and weird phenomena drove me to study science. And when the reality of scientific work left me jaded and burned out, to journalism. I make my living writing about the weird and wonderful things that make our world so interesting, whether historical or current, and that takes me all over the country, and sometimes even further abroad. It seems, though, that there is someone who doesn't want this particular story getting out. No one will touch it. Even my own blog was mysteriously shut down after I posted part of it there. And so, I'm doing what any self-respecting freelancer would do, and I'm turning to the wider internet. I have no idea who's suppressing this, or how, or why. But I need to get this out there. The story came to me completely by accident. I was researching an historical piece involving a supposed medium who operated in rural New South Wales in the 1800s, when I came across a tiny snippet on a forum. The basic gist of it seemed to be that this farmer had been losing cattle in gruesome ways, and at an alarming rate, and he'd reached his wit's end. He provided little more info than that, really, but for some reason, my intuition kicked in. I had planned to go out to the area anyway, do some interviews regarding my long-dead medium, so a few extra kilometers and a few extra questions couldn't possibly hurt. Of course, I would turn out to be slightly wrong about that. I sent the man a private message, wondering if he would ever even see it, and I packed up the laptop. Time to go. The drive out of Sydney would take quite a few hours, and I wanted to make it by nightfall. Most city folk find the drives away from Sydney boring, except maybe for the coastal roads. Once you clear the city and the mountains, if you happen to be heading far enough west, it's just endless rolling hills. Some of them are nothing but pasture, others nothing but brown-green bushland, and beyond those hills, you hit the plains. For miles in every direction, nothing but dirt and pasture, dotted with ancient gums. Personally, I think the dry country is every bit as beautiful as the more popular parts of Australia, and I always love driving through it. When I arrived at my destination, a small town some 150 k's north of Griffith, the farmer had in fact sent me an email. He told me that he'd received no other responses, and that the killings had actually stopped in the months since his post. Still, he was just as puzzled as he had originally been, and he was keen to talk about it. I told him where I was staying, and he promised to meet me the next day. I spent the morning researching my medium piece, but once I sat down with the farmer, I realized that that one might have to take a back seat to this new story. He He and his wife met me downstairs at the country pub where I was staying. After introductions, Jack and his wife Mary, names changed, obviously, sat down with a beer and told me and my recorder their tale. It had started several months earlier. Jack had woken with the sun, as usual, and headed out to feed the cattle. There's not as many cattle farmers as sheep farmers out that way, but pasture is pasture, and plenty of relatively small hole graziers like Jack make it work. When he went out to the main paddock though, he noticed that the majority of the cattle beyond the fence had crammed into the far corner near the gate.
That's weird behaviour. Cattle might live in a herd, sure, but they still like their space. I have seen them huddle up like that during storms and whatnot, when they get really scared. So I right away figured something was up. Couldn't have guessed what though.
From there, Jack said he took his ute deeper into the paddock, heading to the feeders. That's when he saw why the cattle had huddled into the corner of the fence line.
I saw the crows first. I knew what they meant. The way they were all down on the ground. We lose a few head every year. Part of the job. So I drove over there to see what had happened. Can't have an illness going through the herd, for example, you know. So I needed to work out why this steer had kicked it.
He took a sip of his schooner, shaking his head suddenly at the memory.
Wasn't no illness that killed this steer, though. The ute scared off the crows, and all I seen was blood. Blood and meat. It looked like a butcher's shop on mince-making day. Occurred to me later, I should have snapped some pictures, but I didn't think of it at the time. Anyway, this steer had been torn to bits. One leg over here, a head over there, another leg over there somewhere. Wasn't much big meat left either. Something had a good feed, and none too fancy table manners. Now, out here, there's nothing I know of that'd do that. We got a problem with feral dogs like most farming communities, but taking a fully grown healthy steer from a herd, I don't want to say it had never happened, but I've sure as hell never seen it. We got baits on the property too, and we've not seen a dog for maybe 2 years or so. Obviously at the time, Mary and I still reckon that's the most likely culprit. So, I lay more baits, move the cattle out of that paddock, and I don't think much more of it.
Jack got up to order another round at this point, and Mary and I made small talk in the interim.
Alright, where was I? Oh, right. Next few weeks we lost a few more the same way. Started to look like a problem, but we couldn't do a lot about it, obviously. Wouldn't say it was real regular either. Sometimes 2 days between them, sometimes 4 or 5. Folks around town suggested stuff like patrolling the place at night, but that's not going to work when you got to bust your balls for 10 hours on no sleep. It's not like this is one of those massive stations. I employ one part-time stocky and my son helps out when things get hectic, but otherwise it's all me. So, we reported it to the coppers. Weird thing was, the local cops were happy to take a look into it, but once they called in for some expert help, it all got stonewalled. Cops dropped it like a warm beer. Told us to just leave it alone. Anyway, one night there's a god-awful commotion outside. We had some cattle in the house paddock, ready to move in the morning. At about 1 a.m, they start kicking up all sorts of hell. So I grab the rifle out of the gun safe, and I go out on the back deck. It's dark as the inside of a dog, so I don't see much. But I can see the steers all gunning it towards one end of the paddock. Then, off to the left, there's this sound, right? Like a crunching, tearing sound. By this point, I'm pretty much packing it. So I grab the mag light from next to the back door and I shine it down that way.
Jack takes another big swig of his schooner, and his hands were shaking. Mary rests a hand on his shoulder.
It takes me a second to work out what I'm looking at. But there's definitely something there. Big. It's just a dark shape. But when the light hits it, and it turns to me, I realise I was looking at the back end of it. It's got the head of a steer in its mouth, torn clean off. But it's a long way off, and I can't make out a lot of details. Just the rough size of it, maybe 7 or 8 foot, and it's covered in black fur. Big eyes too, reflecting the light from the torch. Went from orange to green as it moved, a bit like a dog or a fox's eyes. But no dog or fox is that bloody tall. It didn't like the light though. Made to come at me, so I shot at it. Honestly, reckon I missed the thing, but it did the job anyway. Whatever it was, it dropped to all fours and shot through. The next day we reported it to the cops, but they didn't seem very interested. A few days later, we got a visit from a couple of federal officers from Canberra. They were nice enough, but they assured us that whatever I had seen must have been a misidentification, and folks had been tracking a big pack of feral dogs through the area. You believe that? I could cop the misidentification, maybe. I happily admit I was shitting myself, and that can mess with the mind. But you tell me why 2 feds need to come all the way up from Canberra and tell me it was dogs. We got the locals, we got rangers. So why did 2 blokes from the capital need to come out for a pack of dogs?
The man had a point. I couldn't think of a single good reason for the Australian Federal Police to even concern themselves with some cattle deaths and feral dogs.
Didn't matter in the end. Never saw the thing again. Although I did find a couple of roos torn up at the very edge of the property the next week. Since then, not a hair. Whatever it might have been, looks like it's moved on. Heard tell of something else though, a week or 2 ago. Something bad.
I prompted him to continue as he looked around, as though making sure no one else was listening.
My son I was telling you about earlier, he helps me out sometimes, but he's got a real job too. Works out at Griffith as a sales rep for one of the wineries. He was a couple of towns over, shilling booze as he does, when he hears this story. A couple of days before, a farmhand went missing out on one of the properties. Good kid, never in any trouble. Found his 4-wheeler smashed up in one of the paddocks and no sign of the lad. They figured he must have rolled it or something. Struggled off to get help. Except that there were no tracks leading away from it. So they spread out, looking for any sign. And they did find a track. But it wasn't from the young fella.
At this point, Jack pulled out his phone.
He managed to get me a pic of what they found. The ground at my place is too dry for any real signs lately, unless you're an indigenous tracker or some shit. But out there, they got a few tracks. Here, take a look.
Jack handed his phone over, and I almost dropped it in shock as the picture registered in my head. Smudges and smearing made it difficult to identify the exact kind of animal, but it was an image of a paw print That much was clear. Possibly canine, based on the overall shape. But if the scale item against it was real, then that meant the track in this photo had to be at least 20 centimeters long. I found myself needing a drink too. This is Australia. What the fuck sort of animal has a foot that big? They had shot a wolf, an impressive specimen. But the beast described in the attacks around Gevaudan did not resemble a wolf, and the villagers were unconvinced. They knew a wolf when they saw it, and none had ever met a wolf that could survive the barrage of ammunition their beast had sustained. When they cut the belly of the wolf open, a most gruesome task to be sure, the villagers were certain. The last attack had been mere hours earlier, yet no human remains could be found. The king and his men insisted they had killed the culprit, but the villagers around Gevaudan still looked at the dark forest with fear. The beast of Gevaudan, in their eyes, still lurked somewhere out there. Thomas Walter Blake, in a personal letter, 1770. I'm sure you can see why this case had sucked me in. Even if it wound up being nothing, as someone who had been obsessed with the unexplained my whole life, the parallels between this and other cases were hard to ignore. A whole lot of beastly encounters with unknown vicious creatures had happened over the years, and there was a chance I might be smack in the middle of another one. I had to visit the farm where the young worker had disappeared. Jack gave me the address and I headed out there the next day, a couple of hours' drive further west. There, I met the owners, Terry and Grace, who were only too happy to put on a cup of tea and talk about their own strange experiences. They didn't agree for me to record them, so I had to take physical notes. I fashioned the below piece from those notes. It didn't start with Tom. The young farmhand's disappearance was the zenith of the activity, but it came after a fortnight or so of strange occurrences. First, Terry found every single chicken on the property slaughtered or outright gone. It would have been easy to attribute that crime to foxes, or perhaps the increasingly frequent sightings of feral dogs. Except that an entire corrugated iron wall section had been torn off from the large coop. Not many foxes can do that. Next came the cries. Chilling sounds emanating from the bush behind the farm. They came late at night, carried on the still air, deeply resonant and almost demonic. Terry and Grace both heard them, as did several of the workers, and no one could honestly say they'd ever heard anything similar before. If not for the volume and the massive timber, the howls could have almost been mistaken for a dingo, although dingoes had been wiped out many years earlier around these parts. But the coughing roars and the chattering ululating wails were not those of any animal that have ever been heard in Australia, native or otherwise. Grace described it as being how she'd always imagined the sound of hellhounds, or perhaps the infamous hound of the Baskervilles. There was a wrongness about it that came through loud and clear with every call. They stopped going out at night, and they stopped locking up the guns. Laws be damned. Over the course of about a week, the sounds came and went. Sometimes they sounded unbearably close, and others, they seemed to be carried from miles and miles away. Then, Terry started finding corpses in the paddocks. Unlike Jack's cattle, these corpses seemingly weren't the result of predation. Terry runs massive herds of sheep and, for whatever reason, they started turning up decapitated. The corpses were otherwise unharmed, each sporting one massive traumatic injury that removed the head. They were also found in strange places. Paddocks and yards without stock, hanging on fences, or the climbing pegs on power poles, on top of the hay bales in the feed paddocks, and even on top of a water tank somehow. And, chillingly, one morning Terry walked out the front door to find 4 decapitated kangaroos neatly lined up on his porch, thick blood seeping into the wooden decking. For most people, that might have been the last straw. But Terry and Grace live off the land, and if they fled even for a few days, it could have cost them thousands in income. So they stayed. They offered their workers the opportunity to head into town, but all 3 of them refused. The morning of his disappearance, Tom woke early and ate in the kitchen, overlooking the paddocks all the way to a range of small hills that were several miles away. When Terry rose about half an hour later, Tom said he'd seen a large, dark shape moving in the dawn light, down by the creek. He resolved to head out on a 4-wheeler once the sun was higher, see if he could find any solid evidence of what they might be dealing with. Anything that might help them get rid of it. Terry was reluctant to let him go. They had been waiting until later in the day to go outside, and they had been using the utes in case they came upon anything. But Tom was insistent, and at about 10 a.m, he gathered a few things into a pack and just left. When he hadn't returned by 3 p.m, Terry became concerned. He and another worker, Grant, took one of the old utes out and followed the creek, hoping to find Tom. They came across the 4-wheeler right near the boundary of the property around the bush, irreparably damaged. Terry knew right away that something awful had happened to his young employee. The idea that he must have crashed, as relayed later by Jack a few hours away, came from the townsfolk. Of course, that could be true. He could have crashed. But that can't have been all that happened. The 4-wheeler showed signs of an attack, for lack of a better word. 2 tires were shredded, as though by massive teeth, and certainly not as a result of the gentle, pastoral terrain. One wheel was torn off and lay quite a distance away, and what looked like claw marks raked over the red paint. Terry, fearful though he was, immediately began searching for tracks. If Tom was still out there, he would be in serious danger. That's when they found the huge prints. There were 5 semi-distinct impressions, and many more others that were no more than marks on the ground where something heavy had passed through. All 5 were smeared heavily, potentially distorting their true size. But there was no doubt that even at half the size of the actual impression, the foot would have been far larger than any animal currently found anywhere in Australia. These tracks were made by something big, something solid, and something heavy. As much as he feared for Tom, Terry refused to follow those tracks into the bush. Instead, he called the local police, but they couldn't make it out until the next morning. By then, there was no trace of Tom. Terry told the police everything that had been happening. He showed them the decapitated carcasses and the tracks, and being local, they demonstrated a real concern. A search party looked for Tom for 2 days before someone found his pack, soaked in blood, on a game trail some 5 kilometers from where the 4-wheeler had been found. The search went on for another day or 2, but was called off soon after. Tom wasn't officially dead until a body could be found, but like so many who go missing in the Australian wilderness, there seemed to be little hope. As the search came to an end, 2 Australian federal police officers in plain clothes visited the farm, in a curious parallel to the case with Jack a few towns over. They claimed to have been in the area and compelled to help with the search, but no one actually saw them out there. Stranger, they were seen loading one of the decapitated sheep into the boot of their car before driving out of town. While something terrible had clearly happened to Tom, his disappearance seemed to signal the end of the strange events. The monstrous sound stopped immediately, and there were no more headless corpses turning up, apart from a few that had obviously escaped notice originally. Terry and Grace mourned the young man who they knew in their hearts had been killed by something that shouldn't be out there. But whatever it was, it seemed to have moved on. They hadn't seen any evidence of it since, and no one else around town had either. For them at least, the nightmare seemed to be over. Terry and Grace were lovely people, and they made a great afternoon tea. But I couldn't help feeling unfulfilled as I left their farm, heading back to my accommodation. They had noted much more activity than Jack, who had apparently frightened the thing off completely when he shot at it. And yet, I had no further answers, just a bunch more questions. Why did whatever Terry and Grace encountered make so much noise when Jack had described it as moving through the night in complete silence? Why did it kill but not feed? And why did it put the bodies in the places it did? Why did it seemingly attack and kill Tom when it fled from Jack? Tom had been armed too. Were they even the same thing? It seemed unlikely that 2 large, undiscovered animals would pop up in almost the same area. None of it made a lot of sense. But as it turned out, it was far from finished. I would get more information sooner than I may have wanted to. men found Marie by the river, face down in the shallow water of the margins. The sight was said to have turned the stomach of even the bravest among them, the ragged stump of her neck still fresh and bleeding. They needn't approach any further, for the evidence was clear. The beast of Gevaudan had returned. Excerpt from a story related to Boris Makarov, 1826. I'd left my number with Jack and Mary, and with Grace and Terry, and asked them to pass it on to anyone else who might have information for me. When my phone rang with an unknown number 2 days later, I did hope that it had to do with the strange beast that had quickly become my obsession. As I spoke to the woman on the other end of the line, my heart managed to both leap and sink at the same time. On the one hand, there had been another encounter. On the other hand, there had been another killing. And this time, there was a body. The attack had happened to the south this time. Given the amount of time that passed since the events on Grace and Terry's farm, it seemed like the thing had moved over long distances without too much trouble. It also seemed like I had underestimated the effect of this thing. The caller was a friend of one of the workers from the farm where Tom disappeared, and she told me that my number had been basically given to everyone in town. They were all terrified of whatever was supposedly lurking the region. There had been so many more encounters. More pressing, obviously, was the body. In a breathless rush, my contact told me the attack had happened at a river crossing. The victim, a 55-year-old man, had got out of his four-wheel drive, maybe to check the flow or the depth. Whatever the reason, he never got back in. His body was found next to the truck later on when another driver came through. The contact said the man had been torn in two and that his head wasn't found at the scene. Understandably, the poor soul who had made the grisly discovery didn't hang around and had since been treated for shock. But my contact said that he would be willing to talk to me. He's shaken up, she said, but he's desperate to know what the hell is going on out there. We all are. But that wasn't even the most important piece of information. Jack hadn't seen the thing for a couple of months. Terry had his latest incident several weeks earlier. This attack, though, it had happened 2 days earlier. Interview with James Knox. Name changed for privacy.
Okay, James. I've turned the recorder on, so we're being taped now. If you change your mind about that at any stage, just let me know, okay? Yeah, okay. Thanks, James. Now, I understand what you saw was very traumatic, so if at any stage you need to take a moment, please feel free.
James nods at this point.
Why don't you start by running me through what happened just before you got to the river crossing? Well, I was on my way home, really. Sun wasn't going down and I'd had a rough day. Before you came to the actual scene, did you notice anything unusual? You know, I hadn't really thought much about that. I suppose everything was normal. I gotta say, I was pretty zoned out though. I drive that track every day, so I'm not always paying much attention. So, there was no sign then of what was waiting for you up the road? No, nothing that sticks out. Just a normal drive home. Then I came around the bend to the crossing. Okay, and what did you see when you did? Not much at first. I was looking at the river. Well, it's not much of a river. More of a creek, I suppose, but it gets pretty deep in spots, and it can flow pretty quick. Most folks go the main road because there's a bridge, but this way is quicker for me. Anyway, when I looked back in front of me, I saw the truck. Just the truck. There was nothing else around it. Not when I pulled up, but I could see no one was inside it. I thought that was weird, but maybe he ducked into the trees for a leak, you know. So I jumped out just to see if I could find the driver. And that's when I saw the blood.
James scratches the side of his head and closes his eyes.
Remember, James, if you need to stop, I get it. No, it's just... You never expect to see anything like that, you know?
James takes a deep breath and a drink of water.
It was all over the side of the car. White truck too, so it stood out. At first I couldn't look away, but I was worried about whoever the driver was. I thought they must have cut themselves real bad getting out or something. I don't know. Sounds dumb now, but there's not supposed to be anything out there that could do that.
James became pale at this point and requested a short break to gather his thoughts.
Sorry, mate. I must seem like a total pansy. Nah, not at all, James. It's fine. It's perfectly natural to be traumatized by what you saw. Thanks. Anyway, might as well get it over with, eh? I looked around a bit, seeing if I could see any sign of the bloke from the truck. I honestly missed it at first. It just looked like meat when I saw it. The grass off the track is pretty long, and I was looking for a person. There was blood everywhere, all over the grass. It looked like one of those docos where a lion eats a zebra or whatever. I couldn't control my feet. Like, I didn't want to go any closer, but my feet were moving that way by themselves. And what did you find when you moved closer? Just chunks, mate. Pieces. I didn't even recognize it as a person until I saw the feet. They still had boots on. Everything else, though, I just threw up and ran. Jumped back in the car and floored it out of there. I drove back.
At this point, James paused and frowned.
James, are you okay? Yeah. Yeah, I just thought of something is all. Something about the scene? Yeah. It was late in the day, so the sun was on the way down. Almost gone, actually. I had the lights on in the ute when I peeled out of there to head back and get the cops. There's this wattle across the river. Old shitty thing. Really low to the ground and really bushy. I must have blocked it out in my panic. When my lights flashed over it, I just remember there was something there. Like the light was reflecting off something. Like eyes.
My contact also put me in touch with the ME's office who was handling the body. The official report was yet to be completed, and the chief examiner who had flown in refused to even speak with me. But one of his assistants was a concerned local who slipped me their own autopsy notes, kept for their own personal portfolio. Medical examiner's notes. John Doe, believed to be Mr. of 1 Road, based on identification found at scene of death. Body found outside vehicle, Vehicle undamaged and running. Massive trauma. Not consistent with car accident. Subject completely decapitated. Head not recovered at scene. Confirmed identification not possible at this stage. Body presented in 3 large sections. Abdominal organs missing. Lungs and heart almost unrecognizable. Spine completely severed between L2 and L3. Several lumbar vertebrae also appear to be missing. Left leg separated from body at nexus of hip joint. Flesh surrounding wound is ragged. Indicates tearing. Very little skin remains. A large amount of flesh appears to have been removed from the body, particularly the organs and the large muscle groups in the legs and gluteus. Left leg, which has been removed, shows almost no remaining flesh. Reports of blood on ground at scene and little remaining in the body indicates severe bleeding at time of death. Force needed to remove leg, extreme. Hip joint severely damaged. Wrenching force likely. Cause of death impossible to determine at this stage beyond severe traumatic injury. Marks on bone suggest consumption or scavenging of the body. Possible explanation for flesh removal. Body does not appear to be old enough to indicate scavenger activity. Predation? By what? Notes from scene indicate signs of struggle. Dr. Williams indicates decapitation from singular trauma as likely cause of death at this stage, but accepts the remains are so badly dismembered, we may not know. Hair of unknown origin found on remains. Dr. Williams organises to send samples to lab in Canberra, not on-site facility. Dr. Williams indicates farming accident as cause of death. Fails to account for discovery of remains away from farms and farming equipment. Fails to account for missing organs and flesh. Dr. Williams refuses to acknowledge his oversights. Objections not noted on official records. Dr. Williams has arranged for the remains to be flown to Canberra for more extensive investigation. Remains sealed and placed under guard. All staff asked to leave the premises. It's vague to a point, because even in private notes, you don't want to put forth anything too crazy. But it was enough to set off a knot of dread in my stomach, knowing what I did about the sightings of something strange in the area. So, based on the assistant's notes, I did a bit of research on my own. I knew for sure it wasn't a farming accident. The decapitation of the body, like the carcasses elsewhere, along with the obvious signs of predation, ruled that out entirely for me. The pattern didn't match any of the known predators in New South Wales. It didn't, in fact, match any predators in Australia. We don't have many, to be fair. Dingoes are exceedingly rare around here these days, if not gone entirely. And much like wolves, they have a methodical approach to breaking down a kill. Whether they brought it down or just came upon a dead animal. Feral dogs are savage and lack any of the hierarchical sensibilities of wild canids at a kill. and that could explain the bestial way in which the remains seemed to have been attacked. Of course, I don't know of any dog capable of decapitating a grown man with a singular traumatic injury, as the medical examiner apparently believed. Beyond that, the only other land-based predator in the whole country capable of taking a man is the saltwater crocodile, an animal we definitely don't have in New South Wales, and one that takes its kills into the rivers. That one terrible death opened up a whole bunch of new questions, and it seemed that no one had any real answers. Rumours spread like a summer bushfire though, and enough people were on alert that when sightings began to crop up again a few days later, I found myself front and centre for the show. They had finally, it seemed, cornered the terrible beast. But as before, when victory seemed assured, the beast slipped through their fingers. The hunting party fired and fired, so much so that there seemed no conceivable way for the beast to escape being struck. And yet, when they entered the clearing, there was no body, no sign of blood. Surely, they thought, this was their proof. The beast of Gevwadan, to the people upon whom it preyed, was nothing less than the devil itself. Excerpt translated from letter. Unknown author, 1792. It seemed that the police had stopped taking reports of this thing seriously, and as a result, my phone and email were inundated. Over the next week, I managed to track sightings roughly westward, although why anything would be heading that way at all I had no idea. Maybe this thing was headed for the rapidly dwindling lakes and rivers further out, or maybe for the desert itself. My own research into animals, extant or extinct, that could even remotely describe what had been seen, came up mostly empty. There were a few similarities, but mostly impossibilities. So I started looking into mythical stories. And that's when I remembered the Beast of Gevwadan. It was always one of my favourite monster stories as a child, but time had distorted the details. Rereading it though, so many things seemed to fit. Huge beast, animal deaths, savage killings, decapitations. It seemed an almost perfect match, except for the fact that it happened in the south of France over 200 years ago. I guess, over hundreds of years, coincidence becomes much more likely. Still, I filed it away in my mind, just in case. Then, I turned my attention to the ever-growing list of reported sightings that were being sent to me. I began putting the most detailed or interesting ones down in chronological order, hoping to guess the thing's next move. I was sick of arriving after it had already moved on. Date: 12th of January, 2019. Approximately 8 p.m. Location withheld. Details: I was driving along the road near dusk when something on the shoulder caught my eye. The road here is a sharp dip between two small hills, so it was a bit darker than the road either side of it. It was hunched over roadkill of some kind. I've never seen an animal like it. It was big, dark, and for a moment, I thought it might be a feral pig. But then when it moved, that was no pig. It must have been almost as tall as the car. It was in a hunched position. Before I got much more of a look, it shot off into the scrub so fast. Like my high beams had startled it. It didn't move like anything I've ever seen before. Date: 12th of January, 2019. Approximately 11:30 p.m. Location: redacted. Details: me and some of the boys were at the back of the farm spotlighting ferals. We'd had some sheep taken for a couple of nights, so we were out looking for the culprits. But we aren't seeing much. About 11:30, we hear this god-awful racket. Kind of like this babbling scream. Real close. Never heard anything like it. And we all sort of just freeze. I felt it in my chest. The bloke with the spotty starts scanning the tree line back and forth, real slow, but we don't see much. We just chalked it up to one of those sounds of the bush, you know? Every so often out here, something weird pipes up. It happens. So we kept driving around. A few minutes later, that same scream, louder and closer. It's like it's bouncing around the countryside. Sound out there is weird like that, but one of the boys, he reckons it kind of sounded like it came from behind us somewhere. So we turned the spotty back there, and holy shit. Maybe 200 meters or so behind the ute is this massive dark thing. It looks at us for like a second, and then, name redacted, panics, and takes a crack at it. This thing tears off into the tree line faster than we can swing the light. It was on all fours, and it must have been maybe 5 feet high. Thick black fur and big eyes that shone green in the spotlight. The way it was behind us like that, I almost felt like it was stalking us. We got out of there real quick. Haven't been back out since. Date: 14th January, 2019. Approximately 8:25 p.m. Location: redacted. Details: I saw a huge animal crossing the creek behind my farmhouse around sunset. It looked about the size of a large bull, but it was certainly not any sort of bovine. It had thick black hair, and all the way along its back, the hair looked almost raised, like a razorback. Its legs were long and quite thick, and I think it had a tail. It was hard to tell because it was mostly walking away from me, so I also never saw the head. I thought it must have just been a huge razorback, but then it leapt over the creek completely, and I realized it couldn't be any wild pig. The creek from bank to bank is only small, about 2 or 3 meters wide, but no pig can leap like that. Whatever the animal was, it crested the hill quickly and vanished from sight. Date: 16th January 2019. Approximately 6:45 a.m. Location: withheld. Details: I'm a truckie, and I got myself caught up behind an accident on the highway, and I wound up running late. I was going to sleep at the truck stop at location removed, but I must have been there 3 or 4 hours behind, and I was wrecked. So I figured I'd need to park up somewhere and catch some sleep. I woke up around 6:30 in the morning to continue the trip. I lay there for a bit thinking about going and brushing my teeth and all that before heading up the road to find breakfast. And then I heard something outside. It's real quiet out there. No one else around. And I swear I could hear like huffing breaths. So I moved the curtains and climbed up front, and I damn near screamed. Outside, sniffing at the bottom of the door, was something. This thing would have come up to the window of the truck if it stood up. It was dark, brown and black, and filthy. It must have smelled me inside the truck, but it hadn't seen me yet, so I crawled back behind the curtains. The thing outside did something, and the whole cab shook. That takes some serious strength. It started grabbing at the door, or maybe the step, and I was scared it might try and get in, or realize the glass was breakable. So I yanked the cord for the horn and I gave it a blast. This thing let out a horrible noise, and I stuck my head out from the curtain in time to see it heading off at a decent clip into the trees. I took my chance, and I got out of there before it could come back. Didn't even stop for a piss until I'd gone about 200 k's up the road. Date: 18th of January 2019. Time not given. Location redacted. Details: I saw it cross the road in front of me at night. It came right to left across the highway. When my lights hit it, it slowed down for a bit and looked straight at the car. It wasn't there long enough for me to get a real good look, but it looked like it had pointed ears, sort of a snub snout thing, and it had big eyes that reflected the light really brightly. It was huge. Then it was across the road and into the trees, and I just kept driving. Date: 19th January 2019. Approximately 3 a.m. Location withheld. Details: we run a pig farm for shows and that sort of thing, mostly now that we're older. The land hasn't been much good for stock since the big drought in the late 90s. All told, we keep probably 30 pigs at any one time in a couple of barns and sheds around the place. This night in particular, I was woken up by a bit of a ruckus coming from one of the barns. I almost thought about checking it out, but it cut out pretty quick. Not even long enough to wake the wife. I guess not long enough for me to really wake up and properly think about it either. Sometimes the pigs get a bit short with each other across the pens, or get startled by a fox or a possum snooping about. And I just thought that must have been what happened. I'd heard the stories, but I never expected what I found in the morning. I just thought people were going a bit crazy. But then I woke up the next day, and one of the sheds near the house had the back wall completely torn out. Even from a distance, I could see the carcass of a pig over one of the rails. When I got in the shed, at least 2 pigs were dead, and the rest were nowhere to be seen. Whether they fled or were somehow taken, I don't know. But there should have been 6 large pigs in that shed, and there were none. The bodies were in a proper state, torn up and shredded, and even just being sheet metal, it would have taken a lot of strength to destroy that back wall. Nothing natural can do that to pigs. Not here, anyway. It looked like a scene from that movie about killer lions back in the 90s. We rang the police, but they wanted nothing to do with us. So I'm reaching out to you, because folks around town tell me you're looking into all this, and I have no idea where else I can turn. Date: 23rd January 2019. Time not provided. Location withheld. Details: we were having a bonfire on our farm at location removed with a few friends. There was a fire ban on, so I hope sharing this doesn't get the owners in trouble, but that's not the important thing. Late at night, when the fire started to mellow down and most people had gone to sleep in the shearers' quarters, we started hearing these horrible sounds off in the distance. There were howls, like a big dog, but there were other sounds too. Sometimes, whatever it was shrieked out, like how I imagine a banshee to sound. Other times, it was like a gargling scream. We were all terrified and went inside, but it kept coming closer and getting louder. After a while, we could hear it clearly, and we could also hear it snarling and making this kind of barking growl. It sounded really aggro and really dangerous. We switched off all the lights, but no one was game to go out and put the fire out, so we just hoped it wouldn't attract whatever we could hear. Without the lights, it was really dark, and we couldn't see anything, but we could hear it. It got to the point where it sounded like it was right outside, and then something brushed up against the shed wall and snarled. I don't think any of us were breathing, trying to make no sound at all. Whatever was outside walked along the side wall, snarling and sniffling. And then, as it walked out in front, a bit of a shadow passed in front of the window as it walked by the last bits of the fire. Suddenly, it gave such a loud howl that my ears felt like they'd burst. I don't know if it didn't like the fire or it heard something, but it let off that massive howl, and it must have headed away, because we started to hear it getting fainter again. In the morning, we could see the ground around the fire had been scratched at, but there was no other sign anything had even happened. Date: 25th January 2019. Approximately 11:15 p.m. Location redacted. Details: I think the thing you're looking for was on top of my water tank last night. We've got an enclosed porch, and in the summer I like to sit out there and have a whiskey or two before bed. Last night, my dogs who live under the house started going off like nothing else. They've never done that before. Even when foxes get into the yard, they tend to just snarl and growl, or even ignore it. Last night, though, they were going crazy, and then they just stopped. One or two of them whined, and I heard them shift further under the house. Then I heard a clang out by the tank. We don't have much light out the back of the house, but I flicked on the yard light anyway, and I had a look around. Nothing on the ground, but right up on top of the old corrugated iron water tank, there was a dark shape. That was all I saw at first, and if it was just that, I wouldn't have even thought twice. But then, it must have opened its eyes, because clear as day, I got eye shine reflecting the yard light. It was looking straight at me, or at least at the house. Then, it just jumped straight off the tank. Our old tank is about 6 meters tall at the top, and it just threw itself right off. I barely heard it land, although it was definitely big. Then, it headed off into the darkness somewhere. All of these accounts seemed to be clearly linked to the animal I'd been chasing, and they all took place along a path heading west and slightly north. Based on that, and based on the timings, I thought I might be able to intercept it if I just got there fast enough. It seemed as though it would pass through a collection of mostly dry lakes and creeks, an area known by locals as Barren Lakes, within a day or two. And I decided that I was going to beat it there. I really didn't know what I was in for, but I'd gone too far now, and I had to know. Honestly, I still don't know how I lived to tell the story from this point onwards. When Jean Chastel finally killed the beast with his silver bullet, he spawned a legend. Many hailed him as a hero, and the attacks, miraculously, did indeed end. But still, the people would not be entirely satisfied. For Jean Chastel himself had a reputation as a beast, and some began to question his motives. Some said Chastel had raised the beast himself, only able to kill it because it trusted him. Some said Chastel had loosed the beast, a trained monster, to exact bloody and random retribution for some perceived slight. And others, well, they said that the beast of Gévaudan, the loup-garou, had been Chastel himself all along. Albert Dumas, in a piece regarding werewolves, 1813. Before I could begin following the trail our unknown monster had left, someone knocked on my hotel room door. A young bloke stood before me, maybe 5 or 6 years my junior. His jaw set, but his eyes nervous. Have you been looking for the monster thing that people have been seeing? He stammered. Yeah, that's me, I smiled. How can I help you? Can I come in? Or we can go down to the bar if you prefer. Sorry, I know this is random. Somewhat hesitantly, I gestured him inside. Thanks. I'm Aaron, by the way. He extended his hand, but tentatively, like he wasn't sure if it was the done thing. You know about Tom, right? The stockhand? That's my brother. Or was my brother. A sadness came over him as I took his hand and shook it. I'm sorry, mate. Has there been any news or... Of course, I knew there hadn't been, but I felt like he could use a little hope. Aaron shook his head. I know he's gone. If he was even alive when he went into the bush, it's been too long in this heat. That's why I'm here, actually. I want to help you. With that, his jaw set again, and his eyes hardened. He may have been young and a bit awkward, but he had the spirit of a proper country boy. Tough as nails. I heard you were chasing this thing all over the countryside. I've got a 4-wheel drive and an ATV, and I got a couple of 308s. He spoke with such venom that I doubted his intentions. Admittedly, a proper 4-wheel drive would be a lot more useful than my Toyota SUV, and the security of rifles that could drop a razorback sounded pretty good. But I had no idea what I might find, and I wondered whether I could deal with an impulsive young bloke who wanted revenge. I asked Aaron to sit down on the small couch in the room, and I put a hand on his shoulder. Look, mate, I understand you're hurt and you're angry, especially when the cops are apparently pretending this whole thing isn't even happening. But whatever's out there, it's genuinely dangerous. I got no idea where it comes from, what it is, or what it wants. But I know that tackling it fueled by emotion is only going to get people killed. So, that's a no? He looked both angry and crestfallen, so I tried to be more diplomatic. It's not a no and it's not a yes. Look at it from my perspective, mate. A strange young fella I've never met finds me at my hotel and wants to help me find an animal that probably killed his brother using his 4-wheel drive and his guns. I don't know you at all. I don't even know that you are who you say you are. I'm giving you some advice more than anything. I sighed as his shoulders slumped a little. Look, let me ask around, okay? Think of it like references for a job. I got a couple of hours before I got to get going, and I can think of a few people I can ask. Just hang out in the bar or something, and be ready to go because if I do say yes, we're straight on the road. Aaron cheered up a bit and then muttered his thanks, erratically shaking my hand as he stood and exited, promising that I wouldn't be let down. Secretly, I hoped he was right. The idea of running into the beast alone didn't sit well with me at all. Thankfully, speaking to the barman and pub manager, as well as his brother's employer and a few other townsfolk I'd built up a rapport with, Aaron checked out. I still had concerns about his emotional state, obviously, but as the day wore on, I realized how foolish it would be to tackle this chase alone. Aaron seemed more relieved than anything, and I took that to be a better response than gung-ho excitement. At least he didn't seem insane. Within half an hour, we were on the road. Aaron behind the wheel of a large raised 4-wheel drive. His shyness had yet to evaporate, so I asked him about himself in an effort to get him out of his shell a bit. He had no issues talking to me once I asked the question, which encouraged me. I wanted to have at least some kind of rapport with the guy if we were going to be hunting monsters. Then, I realised how insane the whole thing was. I was a failed biologist turned journalist, hunting monsters. Holy shit. Aaron laughed when I mentioned it. Well, at least it's not boring. He started to warm to me a little after that. We talked about growing up, and we talked about his brother. He was well-spoken, clearly smart, and seemed really interested in my path through life. Living out here, he said, there was really only ever one or two options. You farm with your parents, or maybe you do something else. But it's always related to the land. Everything's about the land. I never got the chance to explore anything else. Well, would you have, if you could? Hell yeah. I mean, the farm is what it is, but it's not exciting. Science sounds cool, discovering things and all that. I think I could do that and be happy. Is that what you wanted to be when you were little? He blushed a bit at this. What? We all wanted to be something silly when we were kids, Aaron. It's not that, I kind of wanted to write plays. Like Shakespeare. I couldn't help myself, and I choked out a short laugh. Aaron glared at me and went beet red. No, sorry, I'm not laughing at you, I promise. I just had this image of a guy in a flanian in the Kuba rounding up cattle and shouting Shakespeare at them. It's just so unexpected. His glare turned into a grin, and he burst out laughing. Anyway, what's so embarrassing about wanting to write plays? I think that's a great thing to want to do. Better than most kids. I guess it's just not the done thing, you know? He said. It's not manly. Out here, blokes are supposed to be blokes. I was that weird kid who enjoyed Romeo and Juliet at school. That's what got me quite a few bullies. Well, maybe when this is over you can write a play about it. It can be a horror story if we're right, or a dark comedy if we wind up catching a stray Rottweiler. Around us, the countryside started to flatten out. Not yet truly desert, but it may as well have been after a scorching dry summer. Sun-bleached grass rippled in the hot breeze, and desiccated scrub hissed and rattled as the wind blew through its parched leaves. We were surrounded by different shades of brown and red, and despite being oddly beautiful, it reminded me just how remote and alone we would really be out here. Over 4 hours' drive from the nearest town. All alone, in the path of a monster. The sun had fallen noticeably in the sky by the time we reached the dirt track Aaron said would take us into the heart of the rapidly evaporating lake country. Near the road, we were momentarily surrounded by a surprising burst of green, owing to the still-flowing creek system that spilled into the lakes when the rains allowed for it. Quickly, though, the landscape became arid and rocky, dotted with gnarled shrubs and the odd stunted eucalypt. It looked almost Martian, with no real signs of life for miles around. But I was sure the beast would pass through here. We pulled up on a spit of land between two shallow, dry lake beds, and we began setting up. Before leaving town, we had stopped in at the farm belonging to one of Aaron's uncles, a pig shooter. He had several carcasses on hand, and we'd taken a couple, hoping to use them as bait. Before the sun lost its heat, Aaron set about scattering the 4 carcasses around our campsite, no more than 250 meters away, and no closer than 200. We wanted to be able to see and shoot if it showed up, but we also wanted to be at a distance if we could. The sun still had an hour or so to bake the carcasses, creating what we hoped would be an irresistible scent in such a lifeless place. With little else to do until nightfall, Aaron decided to cook some food as the sun finally started to sink. It was a fine line. We wanted to attract the beast, but we didn't want to be caught out by it. I had no doubt it remained active during the day, but from our slightly raised position, we could see out over the lake beds for miles while the sun stayed up. It seemed like a good idea to eat whatever we could before the sun dropped, and along with it, our visibility. We ate quietly, anxiety settling in. I didn't know if the beast would come through that particular night or not, but I felt certain that if it passed within smelling distance of that rotten meat, it would head straight for it. They say dingoes can pick up a scent from 4 to 5 kilometers away, and from all reports, this thing was much bigger than a dingo. As Aaron packed up the camp stove and the remaining food, I started a small, slow-burning fire with some of those hard-packed hardware store fire logs, the ones made from sawdust. I'd heard the one story about the thing investigating a fire, so I figured it couldn't hurt. Then, we settled into the back of the four-wheel drive, seats flat and guns nearby, to watch a blazing red sunset and wait for whatever might come. The moon wasn't full, but in a cloudless sky in the open, arid outback, it gave us plenty of light. Much more than I'd expected. I could almost make out the black smudge of at least 2 baits against the whitish salt deposits on the lake bed, which almost glowed with reflected moonlight. I almost started to worry that it might be too bright, but the thing had shown no signs of being overly skittish. Around about midnight, I started to drift off. Boredom had well and truly overwhelmed the nerves of earlier in the evening. You can catch some sleep if you like. I'll keep watch for a few hours. I'm used to sitting out in the dark, waiting for pigs and foxes. Damn it. I'd hoped Aaron hadn't noticed. Then again, it would have been hard not to given we were sitting a few centimeters from each other. No, it's okay, I whispered, not sure how much noise I could safely make. I pull all-nighters more often than you might think. Bad time management. I do wish we'd brought some coffee though. Aaron held up a single finger, rummaging around under the folded down seat, before coming back up with a thermos. Probably not much better than warm by now, but caffeine is caffeine, right? Holy shit. You are a dead-set legend, mate. The coffee was strong and lukewarm, and I slammed it down like a shot, letting the caffeine work its magic. Once it had, I turned to my companion. Maybe it was just the natural curiosity of a journalist, but based on our earlier conversations, I felt like I wanted to understand him better. So, Aaron, mind if I ask you a personal question? I mean, there seems to be a better than even chance we could get eaten by a monster together. It's only fair I get to know you a bit. He chuckled nervously at my dark humor. Sure, why not? I shifted into a more comfortable position, facing him instead of sitting so I could look out the side window. What's your deal, mate? Why are you out here? I mean, I get wanting to be here right now, but beyond that, you're obviously smart, well-spoken and well-read. You don't strike me as being happy to stay on the farm your whole life. You're not a kid either. You could do whatever you liked, go wherever you wanted. So why stay? Aaron sighed, and for a moment, I thought he might not answer. Well, there's a few reasons, I guess. Family's one. It's hard enough to move away from them as it is, but I reckon it's harder for country kids. I thought about leaving a lot, but I could never bring myself to do it. He paused, sipping his no doubt cold coffee. Beyond that, I think I felt like, as a kid, I needed to prove myself. I copped a lot of shit all throughout school. I was girly because I liked Shakespeare and Mark Twain and poetry or whatever. I wasn't tough because I didn't really join the sports teams. I was less than a man because I never had a high school girlfriend. I suppose all that made me want to prove myself at the same thing everyone else was doing. Beat them at their own game, so to speak. If they were going to stay out here and work the land, then so was I. It might sound small-minded, but it was important to me. Well, I think it's perfectly natural, especially wanting to change the way people who have belittled you in the past see you. I took a moment to scan the moonlit landscape, searching for movement. Anyway, I bet if some of those high school girls could see you out here now, ready to take on a vicious beast, they'd be a bit more interested. He broke into a full-on grin at that. Oh, the problem was never their lack of interest. It was mine. Oh, okay. Alright, so your turn. Aaron interjected. Biologist to travelling reporter of oddities. How does that even happen? Isn't it hard on your family, partner, whatever? Well, I haven't got much of either, to be honest. I'm an only child, and my parents moved to New Zealand when I was at uni the first time, doing science. I guess I started that because I felt like it was the best way for me to indulge the part of me that loved the idea that something could be hiding in the dark, or in the jungle, or in the deep seas, or wherever. When it turned out to be a lot more banal than that, I turned to stories and history. I felt like, this way, I could at least keep feeding that part of me that loved the darkness. Well, you've found plenty of that out here. Just then, a sound cut through our whispered conversation. Somewhere out there on the empty plain, a howl. More powerful than any I'd ever heard before, slashed through the silent night air. Aaron and I shared a look, wide-eyed, as the howl rose to a ridiculous crescendo, far above what I thought an animal could create. As the terrifying howl died down, Aaron gripped my shoulder firmly and pointed slightly to the south. At first, I couldn't really see what he saw. But as I squinted, I noticed a large dark smudge moving across the barren landscape. It appeared to be heading for the bait set 200 meters to our south. And even at that distance, I could tell my earlier joke about stray Rottweilers had been well off the mark. The beast had arrived. This thing was clearly much larger than any ordinary dog, and the way it moved as it got closer reminded me more of a hyena, loping and easy. It made a beeline for the carcass and stayed at enough of a distance that I couldn't make out a lot of other details. Still, it seemed to give off an energy. Or maybe my own body had a primal response to the beast. Looking at it now filled me with a gut-clenching sense of fear and an uneasy, anxious nausea. Small hairs on my neck and arms stood up with a prickling of goosebumps, and my muscles began to twitch. I realized they were flooding with blood as a result of adrenaline. My body wanted me to run. It recognized the situation, even if I didn't. In the face of this beast, I was nothing more than prey. Aaron, strangled into silence by fear as well, gently handed me a rifle. The original plan had been to open the door and fire from outside the four-wheel drive. But I got the distinct feeling that had gone out the window. I had no idea how firing from inside the car would affect us, but I sure as shit wasn't opening that door with that thing 200 meters away. He slid open the rear window and motioned for me to do the same with the middle window. Now, I've fired a few guns in my time, but in that moment, palms slick with sweat, I doubted whether I could hit a shed, let alone a moving target at 200 meters. Through the night vision monocular Aaron passed over, I could see my target much more clearly, although details were still hard to make out. It loped along like some kind of canine hyena hybrid, a distinctive and strange form of locomotion that had me think, briefly, of the allegedly extinct thylacine. Any similarity to the legendary marsupial predator ended there, though. The beast was far stockier and had thick, tufted dark fur. It ran with its head down, rather than up as I'd expected from any of the canids I knew. I thought of a wolverine or a badger, but longer, more languid, and massively supersized. It had closed the distance to about 500 meters or so when it stopped. I heard it make the cackling, chattering scream that witnesses had reported. A demonic, alien sound so unnatural it made me feel ill. And then, to our horror, something responded. Another chattering shriek rose from further away, somewhere to the northeast. We weren't dealing with one of these things. We were dealing with two. And we were all alone, in a barren wasteland, stuck square in the middle of them. Even now, some 200 years on, there are those who refuse to believe that the beast was a mere wolf. Some agree that Chastel had bred and trained a vicious, beastly dog. Others suggest that the descriptions of the animal indicate a brown hyena, or perhaps a subadult lion. Then there are the werewolf enthusiasts, as we veer into the preposterous, who believe that Chastel himself actually became the beast. One particularly interesting theory, put forth in the years after the attacks, even suggested that Chastel had made a pact with the devil, summoning something truly evil and binding it within the body of a Gevwardan wolf, creating something halfway wolf and halfway demon. Unknown author. Posted to a forum. 2008. The second beast's call faded slowly, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. Aaron and I were dumbfounded, scouring the plain for any sign of the other visitor, while keeping one eye on the shadow of the first. Is that it? Right back there. I choked out, barely making a sound at all. Try as I might, I couldn't pick out anything that I could identify as alive. My attention suddenly snapped back to the first animal. It had reared up on two legs, like a bear, no more than 100 meters from the carcasses that it had been approaching. My already thumping heart almost leapt out of my chest. On the ground, it looked large, but upright, it was massive. Maybe 7 feet tall. It was as broad across the shoulders as a country rugby player. It seemed to be scoping the area out. It couldn't have missed the car parked on the empty plain, but after a moment, it dropped back to all fours and it crossed the remaining distance to the first bait in a flash. It did not waste any time either, tearing straight into the carcass with a savagery we could hear, even from that distance. Snarls and snapping bone are an unpleasant soundtrack, and it got worse when the other one sounded off. It was much closer now, I realized, as I snapped my head around. Somehow, it had crept up almost to the carcass on the north side of us, while we watched the other one. With ever-growing horror, I realized it was even larger than the one to the south. If this one stood up, I'd have guessed it would get to about 8 or 9 feet, and maybe 25% bulkier. It chattered and whooped like a demon, tearing into its own meal. I am a fucking journalist. What the fuck am I doing out here? I thought, overwhelmed by terror in the face of the beasts. Aaron's expression seemed to reflect my own, but to his credit, he gently took the monocular from me and focused on the closer, smaller beast. Sliding open the window as slowly as possible while still moving it, he motioned for me to move further towards the front of the car. I nudged my own rifle and inclined my head toward the other creature, but Aaron responded in the negative. For whatever reason, he wanted to take them on one at a time, and I deferred to him as the experienced hunter. Having opened the window, he eased the rifle out, sighting the beast and blowing out a steady breath. What followed was nothing but complete madness that's pretty blurred in my memory. The force of that shot in the semi-enclosed space kicked me in the chest and blanked my hearing for a few seconds. The beast at the end of the barrel twitched violently, rolling away from a direct hit and pouncing to its feet. The one behind us let out a violent shriek and shot to a standing position, seemingly looking straight towards the four-wheel drive. I had been concerned, in a way, that one or both of these things had been shot at before and had run. I didn't want to have to track it again, but for some reason, they behaved differently this time. Its cry was answered by a wounded, enraged howl from the animal Aaron had shot at, as the larger of the two tried to work out what had happened. Then, the wounded beast charged straight towards the car. It's amazing how small a distance 200 meters actually seems when something monstrous is charging headlong at you. It felt like the beast would be on us at any moment, but somehow, Aaron managed to slam the bolt back and chamber another round. His next shot was as true as the first, blowing the beast over, and his calm skill with the rifle surprised me as he sent the 3 remaining rounds into the sorely wounded monster before it could even find its feet. Then, I found myself smashed against the inside of the 4-wheel drive, safety glass showering my face as something hit it with tremendous force. With a bellow of rage, the larger of the 2 animals had rammed the car with enough power to lift it onto 2 wheels for a moment. Aaron yelled something, his voice unintelligible, as it joined the crunching of glass and the roaring of the beast. The rifles had been sent clattering around the inside of the car, Aaron bouncing around with every enraged impact as he desperately tried to grab the unspent weapon. Finally, his hand closed around it, just as the beast shoved a wickedly clawed limb through the broken window, slashing his upper arm and eliciting a howl not too unlike its own. The fact that the beast didn't have proper hands probably saved him. Without the ability to grasp onto his arm, it simply pawed at him, unable to pull him any closer. Every time he aimed the rifle, though, the thrashing paw nearly knocked it out of his hands. He shouted something vaguely recognizable as vicious obscenities and rammed the butt of the rifle into the searching limb, causing it to draw back. The head of the thing loomed above the roof of the car, out of sight, and I had a sudden flash of possibly suicidal inspiration. "The ATV!" I shouted. "We can't stay up here. It's going to rip the car apart." He nodded as the thing dropped, trying to get its blunt head through the broken window. Trusting that he would be ready, I threw open the door on the other side of the car, just as the remainder of the window gave in and the massive, savage head of the beast burst through. Aaron and I both managed to get out just before it could close those huge jaws around either one of us, and I put my head down and sprinted for that ATV faster than I had ever run in my life. I jumped on the front and I whipped my head around as Aaron piled onto the back, just in time to see the beast extricate its head from the mauled car and send a smouldering glare in our direction. Nothing has ever made me happier than the sound of that ATV starting up straight away. I don't think I'll ever be that happy ever again, and I'm completely okay with that. It had been a while since I'd driven one, and I had a momentary panic as I envisioned myself freezing under the pressure and being devoured right next to a perfectly functioning escape vehicle. But thankfully, it didn't come to that, and I let out a scream of raw triumph as we roared off into the dark night at a truly unsafe speed. The plan, formed very roughly in my head, had been to get some distance between us so that Aaron could shoot it from a better, less immediately dangerous spot. I quickly saw, though, how difficult that might prove to be when Aaron tapped me on the shoulder and gestured behind us. Not only had the beast taken up the pursuit, it was keeping pace with the ATV. And in the dark on rough ground, I didn't think I could go much faster. "Can you shoot it on the move?" I shouted, and Aaron shrugged non-committally. "Is that a fucking yes or a no?" No answer came, and I had to turn my attention fully back to where we were going. The land may have been barren, but I couldn't think of a worse time to put a wheel in a wombat hole and flip the fucking thing over. Behind us, the thing giving chase had started that chattering cry again. "Fuck me, it's gaining on us," shouted Aaron. "What do you want me to do? I can't go any faster. It'll kill us both." "So will that fucking thing," he said. I wanted to scream. I knew the ATV could go faster, but with that deceptive terrain in the dark night, I could not do it. With the beast now gaining instead of just keeping pace, though, I didn't really have a choice. Just as I started to throttle the thing up, Aaron leaned into my ear. "Fuck it, we'll have to go into the lake bed." I looked to the left, across the wide expanse of flat land. It would be a huge risk. There could be thick mud underneath the crust, ready to trap us like flies in honey. But if it stayed hard, we might have a shot. Of course, it would also involve slowing down and turning left, giving the monstrous beast a chance to get even closer. "When we turn, slow down for as long as you can," Aaron said. "I'll have a chance at hitting it. Maybe." I wanted to snap back, something about how useless maybe was in our situation. But he'd already started moving into the best position he could to shoot a rifle on a moving four-wheeler, driven by a journalist. I probably made it difficult, if I'm being honest, but I followed his instructions and I made the turn. I couldn't help but look towards the beast as I did. And once again, I regretted it. The eyes shone in the moonlight, silvery and savage orbs set in blindingly fast shadow. Then, the rifle cracked, and it stumbled. Maybe more out of hope than realism, I thought Aaron might have pulled off a miracle kill shot. I almost stopped, but the beast gathered its feet rather than falling. I swore aloud and gunned the engine again. But this time, the monster did something different. I'm not sure if the death of the other one had rattled it, or if the shot had genuinely wounded it. But instead of coming back at us, it swerved hard to the west, loping off into the night, and quickly dropping down the slightly raised land between the lakes and out of sight. For the time being, at least, we could breathe again. We made our way back to the campsite, slowly and diligently, hyper-aware of the possibility of an ambush. On the way back, we stopped to try and gather up the body of the dead thing. What we found, though, made absolutely no sense. It was a dog. Nothing but a normal, everyday dog. A little bigger than I'd expect, sure, but definitely not the massive animal we had both seen. I started to wonder if I was losing my mind, but Aaron pointed to the tracks in the dirt. Huge, pawed pug marks that did not match the dog in any way. We were not losing our minds, but there were so many questions. Unfortunately, we had very few options. The damage to the four-wheel drive was extensive, and we couldn't shelter there with a wounded monster on the loose. We didn't know if it would start, and the damage meant that we would have to change a wheel before we could go anywhere. Not something we could really do given the circumstances. Plus, a wounded animal is often the most dangerous kind. We didn't know who else might be within range, or where it might head next. I had already come to the same conclusion, but Aaron said it out loud. "We're gonna have to track it. End it properly." When his brother had gone missing, the thing had seemingly left very little evidence of its passage. This time, though, it seemed far less cautious. Or maybe it just couldn't avoid leaving any sign on the brittle surface of the dry lake bed. Either way, it left an obvious trail for us to follow, and we slowly stalked it across the dried lakes on the four-wheeler as the sun began to rise behind us, always heading west. The rising sun gave me a bit more confidence. Visibility improved, and the beast would find it much harder to hide in the shadows of the dark, rocky landscape. With an injured, violent animal somewhere ahead of us, any advantage it lost made me feel much better. Try as we might though, we couldn't seem to catch up. Even as the sun rose higher and higher and the heat of the day set in. Eventually, we had to stop and at least eat something. A long night of fear had taken its toll, and I could easily have dropped right there and slept even with the beast still out there. A few kilometers along, the ground became harder again, and the tracks became more difficult to follow. Aaron, the hunter, had to get off the ATV and track on foot, with me nursing the vehicle along behind him and looking out for trouble. A few kilometers further, we ran into a problem. It had been dry out there for a long time, but when rain does come, it comes in torrents. Often, all that water finds a weak spot in the arid soil, and within a few days, it can erode deep ravines as that rain makes its way into the river systems. At about midday, we found ourselves standing on the edge of one of those ravines. Not a particularly wide one, mind you. Maybe 12 feet across and 7 or 8 feet deep. But enough to stop us in our tracks. Try as we might, we couldn't find any sign that the beast had turned away either. It seemed like it had gone over the ravine entirely. Worse, there didn't seem to be any way around the thing. We had failed to chase the thing down, and it had gotten away. I hung around for a few more days, looking for any sign of the thing in the news out west. I wrote up a story, leaving out some of the more preternatural elements and focusing only on the mysterious attacks. And in the last few weeks, I've submitted it to everyone I'd worked with for opinion. They all shot me down with odd phrases like, "This article would not be in the best interest of the publication." I've never heard that said before, especially given I write stories about strange things exclusively. As for the beast, it seems to have vanished, and I had to get home at some stage. So, after almost a week with no more news, I figured I couldn't hang around any longer. I said my goodbyes to Aaron, left him my number in case anything new came up, and I set off home. 3 days after I got home, I received a phone call from someone with the Australian Federal Police. They were courteous enough, explaining that they had information I'd been involved with a feral dog incident out near Griffith, and wondering if I minded answering a few questions. I played along with a conversation that seemed reasonably normal, except that the AFP don't usually get involved with that sort of thing, and the words "dangerous feral dog" were repeated far too often. I certainly felt as though the caller was forcibly trying to convince me of what I'd seen. I couldn't help but feel unsatisfied in a weird way. I had touched on something I felt was preternatural. Some kind of creature well beyond the norm. And I had nothing to show for it. Nothing but a story that no one wanted to hear. The beast itself left no evidence that might allow me to answer the questions I still have. Instead, I started scouring cryptid encounters again, hoping to find something I could relate to what I'd been through. A lot of them were junk, clearly embellished or outright made up. But two of them had enough similarity to the case out west that they caused me to dig deeper. Neither had happened in Australia, but I'm not sure that matters. I don't think these events are tied to a place as such. The most recent happened in Malawi, 15 years ago, where a so-called terror beast killed and maimed some 20 people. And the other being the killings in Gevaudan in the 1700s that I wrote briefly about earlier. In both incidents, the killers were savage beyond normal predatory behavior. Descriptions of the killers were very similar and seemed to fit our beast quite well. Of course, I could easily have dismissed these correlations as coincidental, if not for the way both cases ended. In Malawi, they had shot a hyena. In Gevaudan, 2 wolves were killed. These animals matched neither the description of the beasts or the patterns of the attacks. The villagers in both cases are well aware of what these native animals look like, sound like, and how they hunt. In both cases, they were convinced that the beast was not a normal animal. In the dried lakes of the Western Riverina, we had shot a bona fide monster, only to discover the corpse of a feral dog where it fell. In Malawi and France, some blamed witchcraft, claiming that black magic had been used to turn an animal into something more. I have no idea about all that, but I do know that the body of that dog lay in the midst of tracks that it could not have made. Something unearthly happened out in Barren Lakes. Something I doubt I will ever be able to explain. I feel like we might never know how many times this has happened, given my call from the feds. But I do know that we have 2 other recorded events that seem to match almost perfectly over the course of history. Who knows how many more have been lost, never heard of, or conveniently explained away. This is not the first time something like this has happened, and I am certain that it will not be the last.